So this is actually the most special place that I've ever lectured at, because at the age of 15, I remember being in middle school and being with my, I guess you would call it headmaster or whatever they called it, and saying, I'm dropping out of high school, I'm dropping out of middle school, I want to go to MIT. And they said, sorry, there's no way that you're doing that. So even speaking here today, I still haven't accomplished my goal, but at least I can get close. So today, we're going to talk about scaling trust, quality, and integrity on the internet, really virtually, for a team like Toptal's, and really for all businesses globally. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Toptal and what we've done as a business. A lot of people don't know who we are, and we're actually the most valuable freelance labor marketplace on the internet. We consider ourselves an on-demand service, but a lot of analysts consider us a freelance marketplace, so we sort of use those two terms interchangeably. So let's dive into it here. Scaling trust, quality, and integrity virtually. First, let's start with the definitions. Trust. A firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. And it's interesting because when you say this, it doesn't viscerally react with a lot of people. They don't understand intuitively this meaning instantly. The definition is often new to a lot of people, even though it's such a simple word. Same for quality. What is quality? If I ask you right now, what is the definition of quality? You could probably conjure up the definition of a more complex word rather than quality. It's this: the standard of something as measured against other things of a similar kind, the degree of excellence of something. So when we think of quality, we think about it in relative terms. For us as a business, we think of quality as our competitors. Are we better than our competitors? Is our talent better than our other talent that's out there, or the talent that we're competing for out in the labor market? How do we know what the quality of our business is, and the quality of our processes are, and the quality of our talent is? And integrity. The quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. This is possibly the most important point in all of business, because it allows the truth to come to the fruition. It allows you to talk about the problems. It allows you to get to the bottom of all sorts of things within business and represent yourself honestly and move forward your business, well, with integrity. So why these three attributes? They're the most important things in business. They really do represent if you will win in business or if you will not win in business. Now, this is my subjective opinion, but I don't think this is a very disputed opinion. Integrity, by Bill Gates and many others, has been notable as an attribute that is the most important of all. Quality and trust are, of course, right behind. So, a real important point here, they are also the most difficult things to replicate in business. So, if you think about it, an in-person relationship is often very important for building trust, for garnering, engaging the integrity of that individual, and for understanding their quality of thinking, the quality of their character, and their quality of many different other aspects of that person. These in-person relationships forge trust and allow us to build a very strong relationship that allows us to do business, that allows, people to have families, that allow us to do so many other things in life, and they're all in-person relationships. So how do we replicate these in the virtual world? That is the biggest question. How do you take the things that are the most important elements within the in-person business world and replicate that in the virtual world? Now, to give you some context, we have no offices. We are arguably the largest fully distributed company in the entire world as a core team. That's not even considering the thousands of freelancers that are contracted out to companies all over the world. So we have approximately 500 core team members, absolutely no office. And I'm going to show you today some of the incredible things that our team has created despite of not having an in-person presence, and despite the fact that I've actually never met our VP of Finance and never met many of the people who run our very large organization. So let's talk about consistency, because consistency is really one of the principles that allows all these things to hold true. So consistency of what? Trust, quality, integrity, interactions, delivery, and results. So if you have consistent trust, if you have consistent integrity, if you can ultimately consistently deliver results, you will win in business, in life, etc. Now, this is of course known to so many people, but how do you do this virtually? How do you take what works by shaking somebody's hand, building trust, and replicate that at a business that's virtual at scale? So that is the real question. How do you make these definitions hold true within any organization, specifically a virtual one? So the answer is process. So how to create process in a virtual environment? Well, it's actually very difficult. How do we know that our customer service folks are doing what they need to do? How do we know that our talent is doing what they need to do? How do we know that our executives are doing what they need to do? And with such a vast, myriad, complex array of processes that constitute how we screen talent, how we contract out talent, the disputes in our accounts receivable process, our accounts payable process, how do we manage a team of 500 people with thousands of freelancers all over the world doing hundreds of millions in sales every single year? How do you do that? Well, virtually, you lose a lot. However, you really do gain everything. And before I go into that, I want to make a parallel. And I thought it would be appropriate at MIT to show a parallel circuitry for a parallel. So let's first talk about culture as a parallel. This is actually Edgar Scheins, who was or I believe still is, a professor at MIT, and his sort of cultural pyramid. Now, I don't believe this is actually his, it very well may be, but it's sort of a pyramid that a lot of people have extrapolated and formed as part of his principles and as a part of the way that he thinks about culture. And he's really written sort of, I would characterize it as the most popular book on organizational leadership that exists out there and culture. So let's talk about things in the real world first, because people don't really understand what culture actually is until you start baking it down into the absolute essence of it. So let's talk about culture in the real world. First, you have artifacts, values, and underlying assumptions. With artifacts, you have physical components, buildings, dress codes, objects. If I dress like this and everybody else dresses like this, you know it's a professional organization. If we all come in flip-flops and sandals and shorts, you probably know it's a startup. There's an unspoken rule, and there are artifacts that represent the cultural elements. Stories, myths spoken about. How did this all come to fruition? You hear about whispers next to the cooler. You hear about different stories where people may have gone to MIT or different places, and they really shape the culture of that organization ultimately. Values, stated values, enacted values, and supported beliefs. And these are all things that can be garnered by having in-person relationships, being in a building, and actually talking and interacting with people in person. And then there are underlying assumptions, unspoken assumptions and values. You went to Harvard. You must be very intelligent. You can see that in the way that they squint when they think. You can see all of the components of how their mind works whenever you ask them a different question or interact with them in a different way. In the virtual world, though, this is all very different. None of these elements exist, but they are foundational elements of culture. So how do we recreate this in the virtual world? Artifacts, emojis, memes, chats, video calls, stories and myths, spoken, written, or recorded, norms conducted via chat rooms and video conferences, and swag, which is a sort of facetious component. Values, increased emphasis, increased understanding, and everything being remote enabled, being very explicit with how you state your values and how you state how the company is supposed to operate, because there is no other way to really understand what the values are unless you explicitly and continuously talk about them. And underlying assumptions. Probably, at least to me, the most important. A better understanding of them and a shift from unspoken to spoken. You have to assume that there are no assumptions. If everyone is sitting at home, 500 people at their desk, you can absolutely not assume that they are thinking what you are thinking. You cannot assume that they have the same underlying values or principles that you do. You have to be very and overly explicit with explaining how these underlying assumptions are sort of not underlying, but actually explicitly stated and at the forefront of your culture. And so I'll give you an example of this. At Toptal, we have what leaders are. And so we created some leadership training that says leaders are driven, skilled, unifying, ambitious, so on and so forth. Now, we also contrasted that with what they are not. We also contrasted that with what they may be to clarify to the most granular level what someone may not do, may do, and may possibly do. It's not clear at all if you do not explicitly state this. It's almost codifying every granular nuance of your culture and communicating it continuously so that people do have those similar and unifying behaviors. Reed Hastings notably says, the founder and CEO of Netflix, or I believe he's the CEO of Netflix, not the founder, that having a unified culture is possibly the most important thing, and consistent behavior is one of the most important elements of running a company, period. And there's also a test that McKinsey gives to companies. It's called the, I believe, 7 S's test. One of those principles or one of those characteristics that they rate is the behavior and the consistent behavior of people. It tests the strength of an organization, and having consistent behavior can only happen in a virtual environment if you tell them exactly how they have to behave consistently. So, now back to process. So, in regards to process, your documented processes must become the processes, literally. And this is a pretty profound thing that we've done, which I'm about to show you. It took us about 4 years and about 12 to 15 engineers to create. We almost didn't create it. It's one of the most novel innovations that we've done internally. And if you were to ask me personally, I think it's an achievement within software development. So, what we've done is we've created a way to actually visualize and create processes that are actually stated and out on the platform, the Toptal platform, that our internal team can see and leverage. And they're used, anyone here a computer science major? Anyone? There we go. So we actually leverage an underlying concept of Petri nets. And so Petri nets are a concept that allow for basically state-like problems to be solved in a pretty interesting way. They can be deduced down into a finite state machine, and they really do solve a whole bunch of interesting problems. The problem really with Petri nets is that they're very complex to implement and use in a development environment. So we created our own version of that and documented our processes using that. So as you can see in this diagram, you can actually visualize the state of a process. And this is a real world example. This actually runs Toptal today. I'd say it runs 1/200th of Toptal. This is only a very small component of Toptal that you see. When somebody actually applies, they come in. This actually compiles into code. It runs in memory. There's another layer that allows these states and processes to interact with other parts of our code base. And it's a pretty novel invention that we've run the company by. So here's an easy to understand view of that. So if a company is approved in our system, they come in, they apply on the internet, let's say through Google AdWords or something like this. You can actually see that the company is approved. They go through what's called a transition, and that transition, where you see setup, goes to what's called a place, and the token gets placed in started. And that means they are in the state of started. So our documented processes are literally running one-to-one from how we document them to how they're actually behaving in reality with all of our operational systems today. So I'm going to go back to this and talk a little bit about the way that this works from a process state point of view. So here you actually have different states. You can see that in the red here, they're called tokens in the PetriNet world, and places, which are the circles. These are transitions that are the rectangles. And so each place that doesn't have a token in it represents effectively an off state. Each one with a red represents an on state. You can see that different places and different transitions are enabled based on the states that make up for if the transition is enabled or not. Moving on to another concept here, we have a concept called tasks that exist within our system. So based on the state of the task, or rather based on the state of the tokens and the places, a task will be fired. Now this is very interesting. What ends up happening is if a task is fired and the task is not done, but the state changes, that task will actually go away. And so there's ways, very complete ways of dealing with different state changes, different ways of dealing with tasks. And this is a very, very complex computer science problem and software development problem. There's only about 2 companies in the world. One of them, I actually believe both of them are here, Appian and Pegasystems, which deal with these types of problems in software development in any sort of reasonable way.
Who's going through the states? Is it the individual, the company? I'm trying to figure out whom you're piping through the different states of the PTN.
Great question. So they could be talent, they could be clients, they could be third parties that are coming to partner with us. They could be an array of users that are coming through both of our pipelines, or even sort of tangential pipelines that sort of flow in through our system with third-party users to be able to do something, right? There's so many different processes that exist within a company, never mind Toptal, that this might even be one of our internal users, right? Going through training, finding out, did they pass the training, yes or no? If we found something, let's say, nefarious within the training process or within the screening process, what happens? Do they go into the black flag process? Are they simply rejected? Is it both? In both of those cases, sometimes we have to notify someone else. So there's all these different state changes that must hold true. They must be very consistent, and they must, they really must conform to however the process is.
So is it basically a state machine description, PTNet being basically a state machine, a finite state machine description of all the processes in a company? This is a circuit for companies, processes, and your company?
Correct. Yeah. Actually, you could think of it as a circuit for our company specifically. So that, our PetriNets, actually, as we do QA testing, we created a separate way of QA testing. They actually compile out 2 finite state machines. But you can't manage these in a reasonable manner as a finite state machine because the permutations are too many and it's too complex. And so we sort of backed it out as a variant or a flavor of PetriNets to be able to manage it and actually have it be a software development-like environment. So getting back to our task system, tasks are delegated based on states, and this ensures that our customers and our talent have a very consistent experience. If you look at our business processes, you can actually see a business process memory per record, meaning that for every person that goes through our system, we can see how they've gone through that, what happened within each instance. You can also see that on a global scale, as you see here. We have event login showing the history in context of the process, so you can actually see in an event log type form every single thing that has happened with each record and each part of the process on a per user basis. We can actually take the states and we can back them out to the UI that actually made that state happen. So if you go from a 1 to a 0, what happened? What did that UI look like that made that change occur? As you can see right here, someone marked it as a bad lead and it went to paused. Well, you can see that's exactly the person, the exact user, the URL which they were at when they did that state change, and the actual information that made that state change occur. You can handle separate business units, and so you can actually spawn off different processes, not hindering or obfuscating other processes that are already created. In Petronets, these are called virtual places. In our terms, they're called sub-processes. They're basically ways of spawning out different types of processes to be able to manage them more effectively. And you have processes in context of time. Sometimes if you need to wait 3 days until somebody goes idle to do an action, let's say if you call somebody and they don't pick up the phone, we follow up 3 days later, sending them an email telling them, sorry, you've been rejected, sorry, you need to do X, Y, or Z. And so you can see that all of these things occurred in the context of time.
So sorry, one more question. So you have this machine running in the background. This is the machine of your company. So
Yes.
the algorithm of your company, right?
Effectively, yes.
And then how do you assign, for example, let's say there's a call. How does the system know that Joe out in Montana is available to make a call now? So it's like an ERP system for a company, basically, what you're doing.
Yeah, correct. So we actually built all of our own scheduling systems internally. So we actually have a layered system of scheduling that hooks into all different calendars, and we can actually see the availability of everyone. We like to think, at least, that we have the most advanced scheduling system in the world. We've never seen anything remotely close to it. The best scheduling system that we found by just doing research, we were light years ahead of. We were going to acquire that company, but we built it. We built our own. We probably staffed about 20 full-time engineers just to build our scheduling system, and we still have a fair amount of staff on that. So that's anywhere from, doing the basic stuff at the top, which is distributing the calls evenly, to just figuring out where in our systems do scheduling changes take place, to sort of everything in between. So it gives you a sort of idea of how the whole scheduling stack takes place. And actually, if you apply to use Toptal, you'll see that your availability will pop up to schedule nearly instantaneously, leveraging those exact algorithms. So going into, covered that. So we have the ability to enable and disable processes on the fly. So if a process becomes deficient or irrelevant, we can take that out without hindering the rest of the code base, without the rest of the other processes. We have a full-fledged functionality. This represents full-fledged functionality of almost every component we just talked about. So this is a more complex process. Again, this only represents like 1/200th of part of our system. It's let's see, this is part where you get your portfolio reviewed. And so you can see how complex it is just to get your portfolio review when you actually try to visualize that. We have to make sure that all of the different elements of our portfolio are perfectly represented. If they're not, you go back and forth in processes. If that doesn't happen in a, let's say, seamless way, then there are other events that have to occur. So you can see how complex it is just to get your portfolio reviewed in one specific part of a company like ours. And to top it off, so it seems I'm going backwards here. We have a full-fledged IDE. So we created an entire development environment to ensure that we can create processes and systems like this without having to write code and do all these sorts of things. And so you can see and start to visualize and understand how a visual system is so important to running a virtual company. It allows you to see and understand all the different interactions that exist within a company and have that hold completely consistently all throughout our entire business. Now, this took us about 4 years to develop. For us to actually migrate all of our process over takes another 2 years. So only parts of our system exist within this form, the most complex parts, the most important critical parts of our system. So we're in the process currently of actually taking our code and moving this over to visual processes. It's extremely difficult to run a system or a business with code. I would say it's almost untenable or unmanageable today if you want to run a very high quality, very high integrity business, because there are so many different edge cases that exist within a business that if you don't visualize them, it becomes impossible no matter how good your code base is. We have almost 200 engineers at Toptal. They are incredible engineers. They've all taken all sorts of algorithm tests and passed them and are world-class engineers and have worked at some of the best companies that everyone in this room knows. And it's still exceptionally difficult to architect solutions that allow you to run a business effectively if you don't do it using these types of methods. And this really gives you an understanding of how far we've gone as a fully virtual company to be able to ensure that integrity, quality, and trust exist within our system. We went to the extent of creating a full-fledged programming language to do exactly that. And you almost have to do exactly that to ensure success if you want to go to the next level and continue to be successful. So, in-house or virtual, which is better? Well, I'll tell you. When I started Toptal, it was 2010. There were about 8 competitors in the market, 2 which were dominant, and now we're the most valuable freelance marketplace in the entire world.
Who were the ones that were dominant?
Elance and Odesk at the time. We're now second in terms of revenue, 1 in terms of valuation. We've created our business by creating exceptional operational processes, understanding the nuances of a virtual environment, taking in all of those components into consideration and saying, how do we create the most effective organization in the world? And I'll tell you how you do that. You do it by being virtual. It is indisputable. It is absolutely the case, and we have proved it. So what great can we do with this knowledge? Well, instead of focusing on virtual reality, let's focus on things like virtual integrity. And we can figure out what else we can do besides creating companies to further society and other great things. Thank you.
Thank you so much.